Okay. Good afternoon, LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today. Super excited to be here with one of my good friends made over LinkedIn, Tim Lockey, and I'll let him introduce himself in a minute, but we're super jazzed to talk about nonprofit tech. I mean, one of my favorite subjects. And Tim was really the person that, for me personally, just kind of, I don't know, opened my mind to nonprofit tech and what was not working in nonprofit tech. And I'll jump on that a little bit more in a second. But I'm Tasha, part of the Yibu Digital team. And here at Yibu Digital, we teach nonprofits how to lead with digital. So we're full service marketing and fundraising agency. And we're located in Canada, but work all over North America. And just for context, I guess, I used to use Salesforce. Tim was always talking about Salesforce and Salesforce adoption. And so that was my first introduction. But I am going to let Tim talk a little bit about what he does, and then we're going to jump right into all the fun of nonprofit tech. So, Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's so fun to do this with you. And we've been talking for so long. It's fun to have a conversation together that's live on LinkedIn. So my name's
Yeah.
Tim Lockey. I am the CEO and janitor of the Human Stack, which is a company that helps rethink the way that we structure technology in our minds first and then in our practices. I call myself a digital transformologist as of last week. I feel like
I
that's
like
the word
that.
I've been looking for
I like
4
it.
years now, and I'm so excited about it. So I study the way we transform, right? So we're changing the way we change, and I think it's been really fun.
I love that. And, I was trying to remember how I first heard about you, found you, because, and it was LinkedIn for sure. And I think I just jumped on a webinar similar to this. It was just happened across my screen. And I remember just everything you were saying, just being like light bulbs going off in my head, because at that time I was playing like a tech translationist for nonprofits, playing the middleman, trying to go, I don't get some of this lingo of Salesforce. Why is it so hard? And trying to do that for nonprofits. And Alexander Lapa, who awesome, Alex, so glad you're here. Like I said, just threw in a yay. He was actually the person who was like, oh yeah, translationist, but then everything you were saying was the things that I was going, there is clearly a better way to go about doing this. So I'm really glad you're here. And I think I love the message of what you've been putting out on LinkedIn. So anybody who's not already following Tim, please jump in on that, because every day I'm constantly enjoying everything you put out. So we're going to jump into this. And I mean, I love even the title of, is nonprofit tech the villain or the hero, right? Because I think it's been playing the role of villain for a long time. Everybody wants to avoid it. Nobody wants to talk about it. But we all want it to work, right?
Yes. Yeah,
We all want it to work.
absolutely. And it's confusing why it doesn't. It's technology, like it just works, or like what is the problem with it?
What
And
is the problem?
and ditto to you on content, by the way. I love what you're I feel like every day I'm like, "Oh, that's right." And you know that it's good content. I hope you feel this way about mine. You know it's good content where you're like, I already knew that or thought that, but I didn't know how to say it well, or and then every once in a while it's like, okay, that's brand new. And I love the mix of your content as well, because I feel like
No, thanks.
that's what I experience.
Well, I mean, I could gush about you forever. So that's not the point of today. It's not just a gush fest, but it is going to be a conversation about technology. So we're going to start off today talking about the rise of all of these nonprofit technology options. And you've been in the space for quite a long time. And, I think that not only gives weight to your conversations because you've seen a lot of adoptions, you also helped nonprofits with adoptions. So we've kind of got this rise of so many technology options, but then right fit challenges. So maybe you can speak to that for a minute for us.
Yeah, I found that. So I started working with nonprofits and technology around 2002. So that's like when I graduated from economics school, and then jumped into a nonprofit, and found that my best contribution to the organization I joined, which was a global organization of about 450 staff, and what I found was my best contribution was helping with the technology. And so, and especially in the early aughts, the world was shaped so differently. I remember
Yeah.
my first big win was getting my boss off of Popmail and into IMAP so that I could help him manage his, his phone, his computer, and his email, and it would all sync up. And that was like big news. That was like
Big
huge.
news.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So,
I love it.
um, yeah, so I think that some of the right fit challenges are that we don't stop and think enough about the early ways that technology is formed. Like what is early stack versus later stack. And so I want to just, if it's okay, I'm going to throw something up,
Yeah,
which is relatively new. I don't think I've shown it anywhere before, but it's about what does it look like? What does the tech stack evolution look like?
sure. I'd
Um,
love that.
okay, cool. Give me just 1 second to arrange all of that. Um, and I don't think that this is shocking or surprising in one sense, except that if we don't start thinking about it early enough, what we end up doing is thinking that the stack starts with the CRM. And so I would say 80% of the time when people say tech in, nonprofits, what they're saying is um, CRM,
Yeah.
and it's just short code for that, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I think that's the thing that everybody's dreaming of, right? Like that whole, oh, it's all going to come together, right? So,
Yep.
okay.
Okay, can you see that screen? Is that
Yeah.
showing now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. All right, so this is the evolution of the tech stack, and I just want to start at the smallest level because the majority of organizations out there are really small, and their tech stack looks like this, right? They get QuickBooks, and their first tech stack is just an email to sign up for QuickBooks. In order to get the email, they have to decide on a domain. So it's weird, but the early decisions on the tech stack are like that small. This is like the fiscal sponsor level, right?
Nice.
And when they signed up for email, they get a bunch of other things with them, email, calendar, docs, all of that. They don't necessarily know that they need it yet, but the big one they do know they need is spreadsheets. And that's important because spreadsheets are functionally the core data processing unit for early organizations. Like that's the main thing that happens. And then they get online donations and a starter site with that. Sometimes they've already got a website and then they do that, so it can go either way on that. Then they really focus on events, event registration, email marketing. Um, and then they throw in a little bit more advanced, CMS, and they've look how far they've stretched spreadsheets,
Yeah.
and they're feeling the pinch on that, right? And I just want to say this is kind of the moment that things change for that organization because they can't do it all with a spreadsheet and it's time for a CRM. But instead of just adding little, the next module on, what they don't realize is that the migration to a CRM is also the sunsetting of spreadsheets. And that's a
Ooh.
massive change because that's the first time you have to do a big data migration. And so a lot of times the first CRM is where they get their teeth cut on what it looks like to implement technology. And they're doing it, gets all roped into the CRM. And so this was the world I lived in all the time with Salesforce, where we were frequently their first CRM or, their fourth, and they were just going through this loop over and over. And we kept
Mm.
watching that. Does that ring true? Does that feel right?
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, having watched a lot of Salesforce implementations at work. Oh, look at, I've got a little Sarah shout out to Airtable as an alternative, like, and this is the thing, right? Like I think businesses evolve and nonprofits are businesses. So they evolve over time. As you
Yeah.
grow, you probably don't need maybe event hosting and management at the beginning. There's so many moving pieces to nonprofit tech. And at any point, if people have questions or anything, like I think it's, because we're going to cover quite a few things, jump in, feel free to throw in a question. And, I've seen exactly what you're doing, although I haven't seen it laid out like this. So I really like the visual. That's great.
Yeah, I found it really educational to just go through and ask, why is this going? And this all comes from, by the way, a 2021 report by Canada Helps, which was incredible. It's like a digital skills assessment of 2021 that Canada Helps put out. And it was so informative about early stack, because there's a lot about late stack, almost nothing around early stack. So I found that really helpful.
Very cool.
And so the tech CRM upgrade, right? That moment there, and yes to Airtable. And in some ways, it's not about the CRM; it's about the recognition that you have to have a centralized group of tables that are related. So it's a related database, and it just needs to perform at a higher level. And what happens is that it creates an overhaul of your digital culture, because there's so much freedom and flexibility in spreadsheets. That's what they're great at. You're like
Yeah.
just working in them really quickly, but it's too much. And so you don't have to track the digital maturity of individual members, or the collective digital maturity, which is digital culture, until you start to get more integrated systems. And that
Mm,
moment right there, it combines now three things: you're sunsetting something, you're onboarding something else, and then the missing piece, I feel like, that just isn't recognized, is you start to have to deal for the first time with digital culture. And people talk about it as if it's adoption. I don't think that's the right language for it. I think it is digital culture, and I think you have to have a separate way to measure it. Of course I do, because I'm branded on that. So right there, I'm on brand. Okay.
yeah.
And then you get program, you get more advanced on marketing, and then you throw these add-ons in as needed, right? Your grant lifecycle management for some people, supply chain with an ERP, association management, learning management systems. And this is before we even get into like all of the HR systems and the other admin systems and all of that. But this is my point here, is that when we say tech stack, we often mean CRM plus business suite, when in actuality, most organizations are probably running between 20 and 30 systems, just even small organizations. And that should change our mindset about what the task is, from
Yeah.
just what is the one system to how do we manage all of these together?
Well, there's even something to be said, I am that person at a smaller level org with multiple hands and multiple techs all the time. And I think there's something to be said for, we recognize that shifting gears between when I'm having sales version of Tasha versus marketing Tasha versus customer journey Tasha, we already acknowledge that when you're flipping your mind to different projects, that can be challenging, right? Like that switch up, that managing multiple things. But we don't look at tech the same way all the time and go, oh, well, I've moved over and now I'm in Canva instead of HubSpot. Somehow we just expect our mind to just quickly change, you know, in tech, when we don't have that same expectation. It's like psychologically we go, oh,
Yes.
I'm
Right.
changing subject matters. I changed my book. I'm in a nonfiction book. Now I'm doing a fictional book. That changes how I
Yes.
experience life, right?
That's such a great way of thinking about that. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I feel like I'm always running taxonomy in my brain. It's just the way it's shaped. And I
Yeah.
think I forget that for most people, it's just more fluid. Like tech is tech. And I think
Yeah,
that
we're all looking at it all the same, right? Like it's somehow
exactly
the
right.
same tech, right?
Yeah. And Sarah, yes, points
Yeah,
on
love it.
that. Performance management is really critical, and without it you can't act. Like that's the piece where you start directing, like how are you creating KPIs and output measurements around people's use of information creation, especially. So yeah, I think that's a good note.
Okay, so that's kind of just the start. And I know we've already crossed into some of these pieces, but all right. So tech adoption, the good, the bad, and the ugly was one of the like case in points. But what should nonprofits expect as they put these huge investments into new tech? Like, what are the things they're going to increase their odds of it going well? Like, what are the little hints that you can give from your vast experience in this space?
Yeah, that is something I've been thinking about so much. And I'm going to skip the things we all know, right?
Okay, sure.
Like and what I mean by that is we all know that project management is important. And we all know that you're going to choose to stand up the tech in either agile or waterfall methodology, right? So I'm just gonna say, like, that is really important to stand up the tech well, and that's methodology based.
Sure.
Okay, so I want to talk about then what goes wrong on the human side,
Perfect. Yeah.
and where the sticking points are on that. And for that, I think it's this one. Nope.
Okay. And we got a great comment here, Carlos. Hi, Carlos. Nice to see you. But the importance of digital natives thinking through digital culture and just that conversation surrounding that. That's a great. I like that too.
I think that there's a lot to that question also, and especially around trauma, because you get into generational differences between people that lost their term papers back before everything was cloud saved, and the people that didn't face that. Like, there's a different level of tech fear between those two things, right?
Oh, absolutely. Here, I'm going to add this to stream
okay,
here.
Great. Okay. All right. So meet my daughter. This is Alexina.
Oh,
This
nice.
is 16 years ago. She went on a trip and everything went wrong. Like, wrong flights, wrong destinations. And the way that she held it together all day at such a young age was the promise of chocolate ice cream, right? So, like, we're going to get chocolate ice cream. They got to the counter. They went to order chocolate ice cream. And the guy said, we're out of chocolate ice cream. And she lost it completely. As a mom, you know exactly what happened.
I was going to say, I can't even imagine.
Inconsolable. Yeah. And it's because all of us know that there's something called change saturation, right? There's a level at which we can handle disruption. And then there's a level at we can't. And so when disruption exceeds our capacity to handle change, like the capacity for change, you hit a change saturation levels, and humans respond in extremely predictable ways when they hit change saturation levels. And those predictable ways are they have bad emotions. And those bad emotions can come out in a couple of different ways. But the very first thing I want to say about this is that change saturation is really critical to start thinking through from day one. This is how this is the way executives like to think and about tech projects, right? You're going to have time and quantity. And when you're 50% done with the time for the project, you should be done 50% of the way through the build, right? And 100% you should be going, you're already laughing because you and I both know it's like so not that way. But this is the way in contracts and SOWs, like if we graft them, this is it, right? It's very funny to us. Okay. But then how it actually goes is that it's on a curve, like, first of all. So that means that when I was doing this work, I would get called in at the 25% way into the project because we'd only be 8% of the way through, where we're at, right? And then I would have that meeting, and then I'd go have another meeting. And in the first meeting, people would say, why are we going so slow? And in the second meeting with project managers and the people doing the project on my team and theirs, they'd say, we're going way too fast, right? And those differences in experience are really critical to understand. If you're an executive, you focus on this dotted budget line. But if you're the person who had a 40-hour job that got added all, the user acceptance testing, you got invited to a discovery meeting, not realizing that meant you were in the project for the whole life of the project from then on, right? Yeah. And so you're now in all of these extra meetings. It's overwhelming. You're not a technologist. People are using words you don't understand. So It's not just time. It's just all of this disruption to the work that you're already doing. All right. So that's what I want to say is the very, very big thing is that you have two options. If you're in charge of the project, especially, you have two options. You can either focus on the execution, right? Which is this dotted line right here. And you could just say, we're going to focus on this, on the execution, and you ignore the fact that you may go above change saturation levels. The language for this is like, we just got to pull together and make it through this. Like, we're just going to power our way through this thing. And then what happens is that you're basically sacrificing people's mental health to hit this arbitrary finish line, right? Yeah. And it's invisible to executives. I don't think that they realize they're doing that. And people in the project don't have the language for it because this disruption line is the opportunity cost of getting it done on time. and it's invisible,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Well, and I think there's obviously too just something to be said psychologically for people who, when I mean, I use this example when I was talking to somebody the other day about, for me personally, I cannot go to a gym where somebody yells at me as part of the training. I am that person who's like, oh, you're going to yell at me. I am hard out, done, instantly done. You can talk me into a lot of things. I am very easily sweet talked into buying clothes at a store because I'm like, oh, this person's lovely. Right. But as soon as as soon as it gets to a certain level, I feel a certain way, I'm just hard out. And if the last thing you want is a $200,000, implementation that everybody's instantly like, I am done before you even really get
Right.
started. Like the feelings don't go away that are created during some of this process, right? Or it's going to take a lot of work. You all need therapy.
100%. In fact, oh man, like you're nailing it. Because the whole promise of all of this, when somebody says we just got to push through, what they are saying is if we do a lot now, it'll be way easier in the future. That is the whole promise of technology, right? Is
Yeah.
that your disruption is going to go down. And actually, the whole point of technology is to create more change capacity, right? So that you can handle more disruption as an organization.
Yeah. And we had a few great comments here. I'm going to pull up Alex Lappa, but right before change saturation, there's change fatigue, which is absolutely a thing. And I think
Yes.
we need to teach ourselves how to recognize that. It's almost like, usually by the time I say I'm burnt out, I probably should have done something long before I'm using the words burnout in my life, right? So there's that piece. And then another great comment here. So there's Alex, and then to Jamie, but just push through seems to be part of the vendor playbook.
It is the vendor playbook.
Yeah.
It
Right.
is. And I can tell you the economics support that, because if you burn their staff out, you end on time, and they're not writing the checks, the executives are, and the executives write the check based on the dotted line.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're out of the project at the end of this. And by the way, now they have to like try and do the adoption after we're gone. And and there was a lot of relational tissue that happens between the frontline consultants and the doers on the client side of the project. So when you pull those out, you've actually done more than just taken away the institutional knowledge that they know. You're also taking away the relational support, which is a huge factor for humans.
Yeah. And I mean, Carlos, I'm just going to address Carlos's little comment. I don't think he was just saying, hey, now, because not all people are those people who immediately jump out, right? Like, if anything, I find a lot of vendors do try to, not vendors so much as maybe implementers, try to build in support services after the fact. But the reality is, a lot of nonprofits cannot afford support services after the fact, or cannot find the justification because they assume everything's going to be great at the end, right? So,
Yep. Well, and I also think this is one of the big fear factors, or the things that consultant firm owners and leadership should be aware of, is that there's this line for their frontline staff as well. And so Carlos, yeah, to your point, your frontline consultants are probably sticking around after the project's officially over. They're not booking that time, and they are helping their friends who are overwhelmed on the other side of the fence. And they're not logging that time. You don't even know that it's happening because everything's remote, because they are so bothered by the fact that this happens. And when it happens enough times, for your junior consultants, when they see this, it starts to become brand damage for your
yeah.
core services, because they see it happen over and over. So completely agree. I think this is the leadership perspective. Like the frontline staff don't get a choice on which thing they're going to focus on. This is really the owners of the firms and the executives managing the project, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
the outcome of all of that is that exactly what you said. The disruption doesn't go down, it stays high. You've got a 6-figure project in 18 months, and a bunch of people that are really mad at the technology. They're confused by it. They don't want to use it, and decide kind of as a group they're not going to. Good luck with that, right? We are
Yeah.
herd animals. We're community people. And when our community is like, I'm not into that, man, that is really hard to overcome.
Uphill battle for
Yeah.
sure.
And we don't recognize that. What we say is, okay, it functionally works, like the car works. So,
Yeah.
okay. The second option, really quickly that you can do, what I recommend is don't focus on technical execution, focus on human engagement. And the point of the focus here is to drop the disruption down, right? To get that below. And there's two things you do. You create energy and change for capacity. Sorry, you create change capacity by creating energy. So it's not just a time factor. And then second thing, you allow the time to extend. And it was always going to anyway. You're not
It was
losing
always
anything.
going to anyway.
It
Is
was
that not the truth, right?
right.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
And it's like a bridge, right? Like that last 1% of a bridge, you could pay the entire amount for that. Like you have 0% of a bridge until you've got that 100% of a bridge, right? Like, and tech projects are the same way. Until they're actually complete, you don't have anything. And so it's really important to just, I think, focus more on engagement than to focus on the execution. So yeah, I hope that those are helpful tips, or hope that's a helpful way to
No, I think that's great. And honestly, Tim, that pulls right into, like, we've really started to talk about, my next thing was about expectations versus experience, right? Because I use this a lot, even in discussions with being like an authentic relational marketer, right? You really need, if you say you're X, Y, and Z, your company does this, everyone hates a bait and switch. It ticks people off more than anything. It is the worst plan, right? Yes, maybe short-term gains are high because you get a bunch of new clients, but if the expectation is not met, there's a real distance. It causes a big problem. And I think you already highlighted that, right? So the alignment is possible, but the expectations need to change on the part of executives, on the part of, potentially tech companies and the implementers too, and the people on the team. So it's a lot of people to get in alignment.
It is. Yeah, you're exactly right. And the third thing I would throw in there is that people hold on to their emotions. They don't remember the exact experience. What they remember is the emotions that the experience caused, right?
Absolutely.
And so, and the thing that happens is that you create an emotion based on the difference between what actually happened and what you thought would happen. And so it's bad already when these things happen. But when a tech company comes back and fine prints out how they met deliverables, even though it was really frustrating, I think that is one of the, it takes the bait and switch element and then it makes it contractual. And I think that's the moment you really start to lose people, is when you're like, well, it was never about how you could use it. It was only about whether it works or not. And it does, because all these check boxes on UAT are done.
Yeah.
And I think that's really damaging.
Carlos has this great, I was sold the sun and received a light bulb. Right? But sometimes that's how drastic the feelings are.
It
right?
is.
And I think also, like, when we're talking about nonprofit tech, we're really also talking about problems that need to be solved, right? Like, usually by the time nonprofits are willing to spend money on something like tech, there are some pretty drastic things happening.
Right.
And so this is not just a casual decision being made. This is valuable funds. This is, capacity. And people are going, oh my goodness, like, what do we do? And so when the expectations and experience are not at all what's to be expected, that's pretty disruptive for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've gotten to the point now where I question whether or not the project was even necessary in the first place.
Right.
Because what I found over and over is that a lot of it boils down to not knowing how to help humans use technology in the first place. I call this like driving. Like, people don't know how to drive their technology, so they go buy a new car. And guess what? They don't know how to they don't know how to drive the other car either. And so you're just spending 6 figures in 18 months to get to the same spot that you were at before. And that is really challenging. That's really hard to come back from.
Okay. So we are going to go a little bit over time here, people, and Tim and I already knew this was going to happen. It was going to be impossible to not. But what I really want, what's the most valuable here to me, and what I love about Tim, is he's talking so frequently about finding your path to digital maturity and what can nonprofits do as small teams, as large teams? So please give us some of your wisdom, because you are cracking the code on this.
Yeah, I feel like I'm learning so much every day on this piece right now. So the stuff you've just seen is what I've been working on for 2 years, but literally this week I'm putting out on LinkedIn every day one of the 5 different levels on the digital maturity spectrum, right?
Those are so fantastic. If people haven't
Thank
checked it
you.
out, you have to go and
Yeah.
look at these
I'm
series of
going to
posts.
do a carousel, I think next week, where I combine it all together so it's like more
Awesome.
digestible. But one of the things that just hit me this morning, and I was like trying this out, and I was like, this is really interesting. So there are 5 stages. 2 of them are like there's resistance and reluctance. And I don't have it pulled up right now, or I would pull them up, but resistance, reluctance, comfortable, engaged, and resilient. Okay, that's the order. And the big learning is step 1, get your users to get their feet off the brakes, and your resistant and reluctant users have their feet on the brakes. So the first thing to do is to focus on your reluctant users to move them into comfortable. You do that by a couple of things. Well, no, the thing I learned today is that you don't do that. What you do is you focus on your engaged users, and they are your influencers, and you have your engaged users actually you just focus on them, and they create the momentum internally around that, so that your focus
Nice.
is not, you don't focus on them, you focus on a different part, on your engagers, and they focus on
So it's
just
like
moving
the
the whole team.
digital culture through advocacy
Yes,
almost
right.
instead. Okay.
Yeah. And that has just been wild. So I feel like I'm learning more on that every day. In the next 3 months, I think I'll have a really cohesive working model on it, but I'm still putting the pieces together. But that is very interesting. And I'm surprised at how long it's taken me to just realize, like, we need stages here so that people kind of know where to focus your time and attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's great. I love that piece. So if you are a small team, if you're versus a larger level organization, what kind of, I don't know, what kind of services through the human stack are available to you as a small team?
Yeah, we are just releasing right now Digital Driver's Ed for small teams. And here's the story on it. So I talk a lot about driving your technology. My dad learned to drive when he was 6 years old. And my grandpa was like, there's the steering wheel and the gas pedal and the brake, and there's the cows. Go get the cows to the barn. And when we're done milking them, take them back to the field. That
Oh
was
my
his
gosh.
driver's ed. In fact, my dad says he doesn't even remember my grandpa ever riding with him when he was like, just like, go do it. So anyway, totally different time. But it wasn't city driving. There was no parallel parking, no 4-way
Yes.
stops, none of that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. Okay, the connection here is that for almost all of the tech best practices around adoption, which I don't know if they even work, but they for sure don't work for the small organizations, right? It's all city driving. And what small organizations need is the ranch version of go get the data to the barn and milk it for information, right? And get about their day. And so we took our methodology, we pulled all the city driving out of it, and we created an online course in transformational community that's called Digital Driver's Ed for small teams. We're charging 1 day of tech consulting, the price of 1 day of tech consulting for a full year of access to the community and the learning. It should take about 4 to 6 months to learn the basic skills and another 6 months to really drive them into practice. So that to me, it was, I want to see last mile delivery to small nonprofits first. That's been my goal for a long time, and to just be able to say, like, that's out, you can buy it now. I'm very excited about that. So
That's
that
really exciting.
that's just me.
I've been slowly waiting to get the like official, like, oh, here it is. And I think there is just something to be said for, the amount of time that I've been in the industry, the adoption of technology is really one of those defining factors for nonprofits that sometimes see this huge uplift in success.
Yes,
Like, I'd like to
absolutely.
pretend it doesn't matter whether you adopt new tech or not. And it maybe doesn't need to be new tech, but even
Yeah.
successfully using your tech you are currently using and having everybody succeed on it, feel comfortable in it, be willing to stretch its abilities, that's a pretty big deal, and it really does make a difference.
And I'm so glad you said that. That is the thing we're doing. We're not saying, here's how to find the right car to buy. We're saying, here is driver's ed. And the assumption is, we're not going to assume you need to go get a different car. What we want to do is help you drive the car you're in. And if you need a new one, that'll come up in the course of the process. You'll get stuck and it'll be clear you need to do something. But let's start with the lowest level intervention possible to keep disruption down. And that's a lot of it. How do you create change without disruption? And this is our answer to it.
I love that. And, our team is totally tech agnostic because we're doing marketing and fundraising. We're very much like, well, what are you using? How do we best help you in the platform you're in, whether it's engaging networks or Fundraise Up or, Blackbaud products. We're kind of, discussing a few others that we want to support. And we're seeing lots of things. There are so many techs out there. So I don't think there's necessarily this is the perfect technology for your company forever.
Yes.
It's not going to happen, right?
Yeah, just like there's no perfect car forever. And, like different cars for different things. And so your teams will all have a different tech stack, especially as you get into larger teams or larger organizations. You're going to have a different culture, a digital culture for each tech stack that you're in.
Yeah.
And so there is not a unifying digital culture. There is the fundraising culture, which is totally different than the finance team culture, right? And what I learned in this process is that's actually great. There's no problem with that. You just want to encourage each culture to be moving the digital maturity of its team. And that creates a very different way of going about, adoption.
Yeah, Carlos has got the one-liners out. He's crushing it here. Get to the minivan stage. I love it. So I'm going to give a moment for questions if anybody has them. And I know we've gone over everybody. Thank you for sticking with us. You're awesome. And John Carlos, who is part of Tim's team, already threw it out here about the Human Stack free digital health quiz. Absolutely worth doing. I will make sure to send it to people afterwards, but it's, I remember taking it when I first started talking to Tim. And I was working in a tech team and thinking, man, this is so much, right? And thanks, Tasha, Tim, highlighted my day. Anyways, this is super exciting. So many cool things. Oh, and we don't have any questions here.
There's a QR code if people want to get to the digital health. It's free and it'll take you less than 5 minutes.
That's awesome. And it's those kinds of resources. I think everybody's looking for that starting spot. How do we start? The start is so scary when it's tech, right? And we'd like to pretend it isn't, but like you said, I think a lot of nonprofits, the change saturation level is I don't know if that they're meeting the change saturation level because there's so much change going on, or the ability to handle the change saturation is really low. But it doesn't matter whether it's one of those two, it's still a very small amount of breathing room, right? So
it is. Yeah. And the thing I'm learning is that you have to learn to create capacity as you're doing this work.
Yeah.
And that happens, human capacity is increased by energy. Some of it's about time, but a lot of it is, how do you create energy and enthusiasm? People have lots of energy for things that are exciting and interesting to them. You have to flip the switch on that piece, right?
So again, I'm going to just pop up. I'm with Yibu Digital, and we're just super excited. When I asked him to come and join me and talk about all of this, our team was really excited. You're one of my favorite follows on LinkedIn all the time. And I just believe so strongly in the work that you're doing. I think it could be applied much more broadly than just the nonprofit industry. But I think in particular for nonprofits, this is just, it's needed. I think you are at the forefront of what is coming. And I'm just excited to see it start to be out there in the world. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you,
Tim.
Thank you, Tasha. And likewise, I'm glad to keep the conversation going with you, because it makes it so helpful to keep doing this work.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Cheers. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Bye.